And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, could my relationship with my spouse follow the same trajectory as the Michael Jackson Bubbles friendship? And with our snap cards at the ready, could me and my friends get stocked up on mac and cheese and also refreshing Michelob Ultra? And now, the podcast host who can bench press at least 40 pounds of online trolls and his dog, Pete Dominic.
Hello, and thank you, Pete Co. Hi, my friends. I hope you and your family are well. My family is fully vaccinated. That's right. Young Julia, 13, got her second vaccination yesterday. Does that mean she's fully vaccinated, or does it take a couple of weeks to really kick in? I forget. It's been so long since I got mine. But yeah, the Vendums, as we like to call ourselves, combining the two last names, we are good. We are vaccinated. I hope that you have gotten yours. And if you have younger kids, older than 12 at least, if they've gotten theirs. Read today that all 16 states that have hit Biden's vaccine goal also voted for him in 2020. He has a approval rating of 56% as well. I read that today. But let me tell you who's on the show. First of all, very excited to have joining me for the first time, Professor Ian Haney-Lopez. Halo is what his students call him. He's very, this guy, the conversation I had with him is just about as good as anything I've done here on the podcast. Very excited for you to hear that for the first time. We talk about critical race theory, which is getting a tremendous amount of attention right now, and trying to unwind it. Of course, the people that are demonizing it have no idea what it is or what it means, but boy, has that been really, really effective for the right, including at my daughter's school district, which I mentioned yesterday, where they canceled a presentation by young middle school students that were going to talk about why the Black Lives Matter movement is important. And got canceled because the local police department got involved and said it was about hating police. Very ugly here, and you've seen the videos of other places where it also is pretty ugly. But I get to talk with Ian Haney-Lopez, whose new book, Merge Left, Fusing Race and Class, Winning Elections and Saving America. So important, so good. He also wrote a very important book called Dog Whistle Politics. Great conversation with him for the first time on the podcast. Then I catch up with the executive director and founder of Run for Something, Amanda Litman, joined me by phone in Brooklyn. We had a great conversation as well, and I'm very excited to share both of those with you. Hope you're okay. Send me your vitamin N pictures. Hope you're getting outside, enjoying the beginning of summer, folks, these long, long days, and hope you're taking advantage of them as much as you can. I got myself a new battery-powered weed whacker, and it was out there whacking away. Do you call it the string trimmer or the weed whacker? Or is there another name? Well, either way, I hope you're getting out. Send me your vitamin N pictures wherever you are, your nature pictures to standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I will showcase my favorites for listener subscribers in every day's email. Join us in the Stand Up Pete Dominic community right now. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up for a paid subscription. And I hope to see you tonight. That is tonight at our weekly hangout, our virtual hangout. Always a great time. We'll talk about lots of different things, including the big win in Buffalo, where India Walton, who joined me a couple of times, won. She is the first female mayor of Buffalo. She refers to herself as a socialist, and it was a big upset. I've got sound from the victory party last night and much, much more on today's Last 24. Here we go. John McAfee found dead of an apparent suicide in a Spanish prison. Britney Spears says she's been in a symbolic prison for years, and the West continues to burn. Portland, Oregon, approaching a temperature of 107 degrees. So much more to talk about here on The Last 24. Always a lot to play for you. Here is India Walton last night at her victory party in Buffalo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This victory is ours. It is the first of many. If you are in an elected office right now, you are being put on notice.
Watch out now. Watch out now. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
We are coming.
Yes.
Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what community looks like. This is what community looks like.
Uh-oh, black woman said we are coming. I'm sure that's going to be handled really well by the terrified folks on the right. Speaking of which, I can't believe Matt Gaetz is still in Congress. I'm so frustrated with all of the predictions and my friend Glenn Kirshner talking about this a little bit. Rachel Maddow talking a lot, speculating about this a lot. That remember this a few weeks ago or a couple months ago that Matt Gaetz was definitely going to be indicted. Not the case, not so far. Maybe these kinds of things take a long time, but he's still there questioning the most powerful, influential, important folks in government, including the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. And it did not go well for Matt Gaetz, in my opinion. Here's just a little bit of that. I highly recommend you listen to the whole exchange if you can possibly tolerate it. But here is Matt Gaetz questioning the Secretary of Defense yesterday about critical race theory, which Secretary Austin seems to have no idea about.
It is particularly helpful that you have said that the Department of Defense does not embrace critical race theory and that you think the discussion is not appropriate. I would suggest that it is the ideology that is not appropriate, and it is particularly concerning to me that you have hired a critical race theorist to give you advice on personnel matters, and that person is Bishop Garrison. And I would particularly observe that on July 27, 2019, Bishop Garrison tweeted regarding former President Trump, he's dragging a lot of bad actors out into the sunlight, normalizing their actions. And here's the relevant part. If you support the president, you support that. There is no room for nuance in this. There is no more, but I'm not like that talk. And then he replies to his own tweet with what seems to be a very ethno-nationalist hashtag Black44. Could you enlighten us as to what advice Mr. Garrison has given you, and are you concerned that while you testify publicly to our committee that the department doesn't embrace critical race theory, you have hired someone who is precisely a critical race theorist?
This is the first I've ever heard Mr. Garrison be described as a critical race theorist, so this is new. I'm sure
did you review his
would...
tweets before you hired him, personally?
Pardon me?
Did you review his tweets before you hired him?
I did not personally review his tweets.
I would just ask that maybe that be helpful. Is there anything you can share in just these final seconds regarding any advice he's given you?
Let me just share one other thing that you brought up, Congressman, about the input that comes to me. You know, I trust my leadership from top to bottom that they will give me fair and balanced and unvarnished input. And for you to say that people are telling me what I want to hear, I get it, but I'm smart enough to know
that does happen.
Yeah. You know, maybe they're telling you what you want to hear.
Well, I don't know that they even know what I want to hear.
Time has expired.
Oh, what a shame that the gentleman... Really? Should we call this guy a gentleman? Isn't he a horrible piece of shit human being? All right, sorry, but that guy is real bad. Bad news. And here is the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And by the way, new reporting coming out for a new book that apparently President Trump, when his Secretary of Defense suggested that he appoint the guy who was running the Air Force, the Commandant of the Air Force, to be the Joint Chiefs, and Trump decided not to because that guy flew F-16s, and Trump did not like the F-16, apparently. And apparently the guy got shot down in Kosovo, and so he decided not to appoint that guy because he didn't like the plane, the fighter jet he flew. That's the reporting. It's absolutely mind-blowing, but not really, because, of course, it's Donald Trump, who's a crazy person. But he ended up appointing this guy and deep dive from Politico into him yesterday as well. But here he is also testifying on Capitol Hill, taking issue with the Matt Gaetzes and others on this issue of critical race theory, which, again, they have no idea what they're talking about. I have a great conversation about it with Ian Haney-Lopez today coming up. But here is a clip that went very viral yesterday of Joint Chiefs General Milley.
First of all, on the issue of critical race theory, et cetera, I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that, because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there. That was started at Harvard Law School years ago, and it proposed that there were laws in the United States, antebellum laws prior to the Civil War, that led to a power differential with African Americans that were 3/4 of a human being when this country was formed. And then we had a Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation to change it. And we brought it up to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took another 100 years to change that. So look, I do want to know. And I respect your service, and you and I are both Green Berets. But I want to know. And it matters to our military and the discipline and cohesion of this military. And I thank you for the opportunity to make a comment on that.
Thank you, General.
Wow, that was powerful from General Milley, and that is why I got so much attention yesterday with headlines like General Milley puts out a vociferous defense of critical race theory. I'm not sure exactly that's what I heard, but I thought that was pretty good. And after that, we got reaction on MSNBC from Michael Eric Dyson of Vanderbilt University, one of the all-time best ranters, and here he goes.
I resent, as an intellectual and as a black person in America, that we have taken the brunt of anti-intellectualism. We have borne the brunt of being disloyal to this nation, and we have stood by to see mediocre, mealy-mouthed, snowflake white men who are incapable of taking critique, who are willing to dole out infamous repudiations of the humanity of the other, and yet they call us snowflakes, and they are the biggest flakes of snow to hit the earth. They are incapable of criticism. They are incapable of tolerating difference. They're scared of, oh my God, critical race theory is going to kill your mother. And they don't even know. They're not critical. They have no race, and they don't understand theory. And yet they are allowed to wax eloquently about the means and limits of rationality in this country, and they couldn't save themselves if the world depended on it. And I am tired of hearing mediocre white men take to their pulpits to excoriate women and trans people and bisexuals and black folk and every other thing that ain't them. It is time that we in America take back this country for certain, and to seize the reins of authority so that rhetorics of compassion, discourses of empathy, and love in the most radical sense possible would prevail. And that means we read everything. I read right-wing stuff every day. I ain't no right-winger. I try to understand and get beneath what it is that drove that rage, but it doesn't make me full of rage. So I think it's necessary for us to be open-minded, and women and people of color and sexual minorities can lead the way, because the white guys are flubbing it up in big fashion, and Matt Gaetz and Josh Hawley and Mitch McConnell and Mr. Manchin and all of them are in the same boat.
Woo-wee! Love it. Michael Eric Dyson All right, we'll get back to critical race theory with my guest, Ian Haney-Lopez. You're going to love it. Also yesterday, the president came out and spoke about gun violence and crime, as crime is, quote, surging in America. He announced a major crackdown on gun dealers who violate existing law in a speech following a nationwide surge in violent crime, according to CNN Politics. He also planned to sign executive actions with a particular focus on tamping down gun crimes, according to officials, while again calling on Congress to take steps to enact new gun control laws, which is highly unlikely. Major American cities saw a 33% increase in homicides last year as the pandemic swept across the country, and that trend appears poised to continue this year, according to the CNN article. And one of his top advisors, Susan Rice, came out saying that Biden's answer to gun violence is not to defund the police. Let's listen to that.
President Biden's approach is not to defund the police. He's been very explicit in opposing that. He wants to invest in our communities and in safety. That includes investing in public safety and giving police and police forces the resources they need. But it's much broader than that, because you can't just deal with this problem through law enforcement. You need to deal with its root causes.
Yes, need to deal with the root causes. Here now is the president's spokesperson, Jen Psaki, taking questions about this in yesterday's White House press briefing.
And just one about the crime today. You mentioned expanding
the crime prevention rollout.
Prevention, yes, not the crime. But there is a lot of crime in big cities. How do you reduce?
Much of it caused by gun violence. Would you agree?
Yes. So how do you reduce gun violence by expanding employment opportunities, including summer jobs for young people?
Well, first, there's several components of this proposal. One of them is an initial set of actions on gun violence, or an additional set, I should say, of steps on gun violence, which the president feels are important to get guns off the streets, make sure they are not in the hands of people illegally, many of whom are playing a role in violent crime across the country. That's part of his objective. He also wants to provide, as we've seen, has been effective in communities across the country, incentives and alternatives for young people in communities where that has shown to be an effective step.
So is the thought there basically that some criminal who has been committing crimes with limited interruption or interference from police for the last couple of weeks or months is going to stop this easy life of crime if they have a summer job?
Yes. That's it. If you stupid fuck, Peter Doocy. Easy life of crime? I don't want to defend criminals, but it's not easy. It's crime. I mean, has this guy ever talked to anybody that knows anything about the roots of crime and crime prevention? Yeah. If you give people activities, if you give people jobs and places to be, it reduces crime. More.
Well, I think the president believes that we shouldn't allow access to guns to those criminals who are currently illegally buying them from some dealers across the country. And part of his announcement is taking steps to do exactly that. But part of his announcement is also ensuring there's specific guidance to communities across the country to ensure that they have funding to get more community police around the country. Something that was supported by the American Jobs Plan that was voted into law by Democrats just a couple of months ago. Some might say that the other party was for defunding the police. I'll let others say that, but that's a piece. Go ahead.
Some might say, I'll let others say that. Boy, is she good at that gig. All right, so now let's hear from the president himself when he came out and made comments on the crime, efforts to reduce crime, which he is getting crushed for politically.
We talked about the lives we lost have already been lost and the lives that we can save. We talked about how much pain and loss so many people have experienced and so many people have now accepted as their fate here in America. We have an opportunity to come together now as Democrats and Republicans, as fellow Americans, to fulfill the first responsibility of government and our democracy, to keep each other safe. Enough. That means Congress passing sensible gun prevention, violence prevention initiatives is worried. It makes sense. Background checks, ban on assault weapons, repeal of the liability shield for gun manufacturers. It means the Senate reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, my proudest legislative accomplishment, to close the so-called boyfriend loophole It's boyfriend and stalking loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. We added the provision saying if you have a stay-away order, you are stalking someone and you're told it has to stop, you can't own a weapon. Every single month, an average of 57 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner. We can help stop that.
Important commentary from the president yesterday, and this also made a lot of headlines. This comment, I saw a lot of people sharing this on social media from the same press conference.
The Second Amendment, from the day it was passed, limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, you know, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there never been, if you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. The point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
All right. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think you could overthrow the government with just very few guns. I mean, we lost the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan because of insurgents that did not have any F-16s or fighter jets or heavy weaponry, much less nuclear weapons. They beat us. And so I've never really bought that argument, but I think I probably made it myself in the past. All right. Also wanted to share with you a little of the Shoe Man, Chuck Schumer, talking about yesterday's vote to prevent debate on voting rights. I don't know who's writing these, but they're good, and I like to play them. Here is the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Yesterday's vote was another piece of evidence that voter suppression is now part of the official platform of the Republican Party. But I want to be clear about one thing. As I said last night, the fight to protect voting rights is far, very far from over. Yesterday's vote was the starting gun, not the finish line. As the Senate Majority Leader, I reserve the right to bring up this issue for debate again. Yesterday was the first time we tried to consider major voting rights legislation, but it won't be the last. Democrats will explore every option available to us for reconsidering legislation on this topic. We'll leave no stone unturned. Voting rights are too important. The fight against modern-day voter suppression is just beginning. And one other point. Some of them like to make this point, oh, this is just a partisan fight. Bull. This is a fight for the soul of America, and it shouldn't be partisan, and it never was in the past. When legislatures try to prevent poor people, people of color, urban people, young people from voting, that's not a political fight. That's what America's all about. So don't try to hide under that guise. It is Republican legislatures doing this. But in the past, when legislatures, usually in the South, tried to do these things, and in other places, both parties united to stop it. No more. Sadly, shame, 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 shame on my Republican colleagues. This is a very bad day for them that history will recognize.
Well, that was good. And let's stay with senators I like. And it's Senator Mazie Hirono, who joined me a few weeks ago here on the program to talk about her new book. It was so much fun. And you can go back and find that in the archives. Well, she's talking about what needs to be done about the filibuster. We're seeing more moderate Democrats talking about reforming the filibuster. And here she is now.
Why don't we talk about, I would be more focused on the need for all of us in the Senate in particular to come to the conclusion that unless we do filibuster reform, we're not going to be able to move ahead with protecting a fundamental right to vote. And so my hope is that all of my Democratic colleagues some of them will need to change their minds. That is my hope. But in the meantime, there are votes coming up and the state legislative races, et cetera, because it is the state legislatures all across the country, sadly, that are enacting all of these voter suppression laws. So everything in regard to protecting voting rights doesn't happen in the Senate, that there's a lot going on in the state legislatures and by mainly Republican governors. So there's a lot that we need to be doing. And my hope is that we will be able to change the appropriate minds regarding filibuster reform, unless we're going to wait around for the Republicans to suddenly decide that they actually should be protecting people's rights to vote as opposed to tearing away their rights to vote, what I call stealing our votes.
Okay, there you go, Senator Mazie Hirono and the desperate need for filibuster reform. That is all the sound I've got for you in the last 24, but so many more headlines to share. Rapid fire right now. It's time for the news dump. Let's go to Pete Coe for another disturbing yet wildly original news dump jingle.
Farmer Gary's flock of sheep just over the humps. Perhaps he'll cop a feel for today's news dump.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Lots to get to on today's news dump. Let's start with 5 people being hospitalized after a pedestrian bridge collapsed onto a D.C. highway. Officials preliminarily believe a truck collided with the bridge. The incident occurred just before noon yesterday, and pretty scary. Yeah, I hope it didn't just collapse under normal wear and tear, because that would be a real issue. But images following the collapse showed a truck crushed under the bridge, which appeared to have completely detached from a staircase and platform at one end. God, that's got to be really awful. You think you had an awful day yesterday? Well, 5 people were walking on a bridge that collapsed. So a story to help us keep perspective. Well, I'm pretty sure I mentioned yesterday during the news dump that Connecticut signed, the governor there, Ned Lamont, signed the state's legislature legalizing recreational marijuana on Tuesday. And now all eyes are on Rhode Island and New Hampshire as the final holdouts in New England to legalize cannabis. So I think that's a pretty interesting development there. Some marijuana rights advocates telling ABC News it's only a matter of time before Rhode Island and New Hampshire join their neighbors, giving them millions in extra revenue from marijuana sales and the calls for criminal justice reform from their constituents. It's really not going to be a novelty any longer pretty soon. And that is good news. Terrible wildfires across the West as of Wednesday. More than 500,000 acres have burned across 11 states. At least 50 wildfires are burning. Large wildfires burning more than 500,000 acres across 11 states, mostly in the West. In Colorado, the Oil Spring and Sylvan fires and the White River National Forest are the 2 biggest fires in that state. Firefighters battling hot, dry, and windy conditions. If you're in any of those areas, please let me know. Send pictures so that I can share them and we can talk more about how you're dealing with it. And speaking of record temperatures, a heat wave in Russia has brought record-breaking temperatures north of the Arctic Circle. Country warming more than twice as fast as the rest of the world. Daily temperatures in St. Petersburg rose to a record-breaking 93 degrees Fahrenheit on Tuesday, as the city faced the hottest temperatures it's seen since 1998. Temperatures in Moscow broke their all-time June record Wednesday, and the previous, well, it's just terrible, according to the Associated Press. Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested dealing with the record temperatures by poisoning them. So I'm not sure that's going to work. I think that sounds like a pretty bad idea, but hey, I'm just reporting what the guy said. All right, what else can I tell you? Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, will be visiting the U.S.-Mexico border. She's headed to El Paso on Friday, succumbing to pressure that she better visit the border. Her critics, the right, have been yelling that she's ignoring the crisis at the border, so now she's going to go, and they won't stop yelling. It won't do anything. In Michigan, Republicans there announced that there was no systemic fraud in the election in Michigan. That's Republicans saying that. Michigan Senate Republicans who investigated the state's presidential election say there was no widespread or systemic fraud. How about that? That's one of the states that Donald Trump, of course, needed to win and still is fighting to overturn the election outcome of. Well, the Republicans in that state found nothing. No surprise. And finally, Harrison Ford has suffered yet another on-set injury 7 years after a door on the Millennium Falcon almost killed him. The 78-year-old suffered a shoulder injury while rehearsing a fight scene for the 5th Indiana Jones movie, which is filming in the UK, according to the BBC. And that's got me really concerned. I love Harrison Ford. I want him to be okay. And I hope everything is going to be okay on production of that film, because I love Indiana Jones. And that is today's news dump, ladies and gentlemen. Now time to get to my first guest of the show. It's the first time he's ever been on. I'm super excited to share this conversation with you because Professor Ian Haney-Lopez teaches at Berkeley in California. He teaches on the issues of race and con law. He's one of the nation's leading thinkers on how racism has evolved since the civil rights era. His current research emphasizes the connection between racial divisions in society and growing wealth inequality in the United States. His books are really, really fascinating. I've learned so much about him in preparation to interview him. Dog Whistle Politics, How Coded Racial Appeals Have Reinvented Racism and Wrecked the Middle Class, out in 2014. And now his new book is titled Merge Left, Fusing Race and Class, Winning Elections and Saving America. You can find him at his website, IanHaney-Lopez.com. Follow him on Twitter at Ian Haney-Lopez. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy that he was able to join me on today's episode. Here we go right now with Professor Ian Haney-Lopez. All right, well, I've told you all about him, and I'm very excited to have him joining me for the first time on the show, and I have no idea why. His students call him Halo, Professor Ian Haney-Lopez. That's a pretty cool nickname, I guess. It makes you cool to the kids.
You know, I think it's because I'm so spiritual. You know, I've just got a very beatific air about me. Yeah, or maybe not. I don't know.
Or they've just combined your hyphenated name and made you a celebrity.
Wait,
they've made you a celebrity couple.
No, it's my saintliness. I'm going with that.
You are a very engaging guy on issues that are really difficult, as well as, con law, which could be dry at some point. I'm psyched to have you on the podcast, but what do you like doing? Because you're great at just doing a straight up presentation. I've been watching those and the interviews you do. I just wanted to ask you quickly what you like to do and why you think, matters so much, and don't be modest, that communicating these issues, which you're an expert on, the way you do is super important, I think.
Yeah, cool. So let me start then, just to make it clear what I'm trying to get across to people. So the number one thing I'm trying to get across is an analytic point. And then the number two thing I'm trying to get across is what this means for social change, what this means for how we move forward. So the analytic point that I want to get across is the main problem we face in terms of racism is not racism. The main problem we face in terms of racism is class war. And by that, I don't mean to suggest, hey, let's talk about class. Let's not talk about race. I couldn't disagree with that more. And nor am I saying racism is not a problem. Racism in this country is a huge problem. But what I'm saying is, look behind it. Who funds it? Who promotes it? Who looks for ways to stoke it and to reinvent it and continually push it back into the public conversation? And most importantly of all, who profits from racism? And I think when we ask those questions, it gives us a radical way to understand what has happened to our country over the last 50 years. Ever since the civil rights movement, the party of big business, the GOP, the Republican Party, figured out they could get themselves elected by stoking racial hatred, whereupon they governed on behalf of the billionaire class. This is class war being waged in the form of racial dog whistle politics. So that's an analytic claim, right? This is what's happened to us. And I think two big results. Levels of wealth inequality we haven't seen since the Gilded Era.
Yeah.
Levels of racial acrimony and state violence against communities of color that had just keep going up and up and up. And that seem a complete betrayal of what we accomplished through the civil rights era, right? So those two. Okay, so that's the analytic claim. We're in the midst of a class war. The rich are winning. Their primary weapon is racial division. Now, what does that imply in terms of a theory of social change? It implies that if you're fighting for racial justice or you're fighting for economic fairness, you're fighting the same enemy. You're fighting these Republican politicians who stoke racial conflict so that they can rule on behalf of the billionaire class. Right. And so this is and what's happening. This is just such an important point in terms of what it suggests for social change. Because right now the left is badly divided. You got folks saying, hey, we got to fight white racism. We got to fight for racial justice. And you have other folks saying, that's going to divide us. Let's just focus on something that unifies us. Let's do class. And it's like, well, let's do one, let's do the other. And I'm saying you got to do them both together because they're inseparable.
It's hard, though.
Oh, it's totally hard.
let's be clear. It's really hard to bring those two ideas together. They are so at odds, and both are right. I feel.
Yeah, in politics, hard is relative. It's even harder to suppose that we're going to survive as a democracy if we keep doing what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so, we're pretty much doomed if we keep doing what we're doing. So there's this other hard thing that we could try that seems really promising, but it's hard. Whatever, try it.
Yeah, you're talking about having kind of a cooperative, pragmatic solution to a problem, and it seems that we don't think that way. We think in a more binary narrative, us against them, even within, in this case, progressive racial justice circles.
I think that's right, but I also want to just try and be really fair and say there's good reason we're stuck.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
And the reason is, look. Everybody who's honest about every political professional who's honest and is paying attention knows that race has been weaponized against the Democratic Party, that was the strategy of the Republican Party since Barry Goldwater in 63, Richard Nixon in 68, and then wins in a national landslide in 72. Everybody knows that. Here's the problem. Flat out saying that backfires. Because the technique that the Republicans are using is to use code to pretend that they honor racial equality at the same time that they're constantly stoking racial fear. So they'll say things like welfare queen or criminal or gangbanger or illegal alien or today, critical race theory. None of these terms on their surface use racial language. They certainly don't use racial epithets. And Republicans turn around, and when you say, hey, you're trying to stoke racial division, they turn around and say, no, I don't have a racist bone in my body. But you're talking about race all the time. You mean little liberal from Berkeley, you radical. You just accuse me of being a racist, and I'm not. And that makes you the racist. That works.
Yeah, it's been very effective forever. Yeah. I've heard talk radio guys on the right saying that forever. You're the one who is talking about race. Yeah. I didn't say anything about race. I'm talking about super predators.
Yeah, I'm talking about super predators and illegals. And here you go and mention race, you dirty racist. Right? Yeah. I'm just trying to bring us together against race. So,
I was talking about aliens. I'm talking about illegal aliens. And you're saying I'm talking about who? Who are you saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been.
And I mean, this is perfected, right? It's a theater. Yeah. And the theater includes pushing racial poison into the conversation, then turning around and protesting your innocence, and then punching back and saying, hey, not only am I innocent, but you're the real racist, right? And so this has been going on for decades. Now, in response to that, the great center of weight among liberals flipped out and went in the other direction and said, well, if we can't call it white racism, we need to stop talking about race altogether. We're going to go colorblind. We're going to run from the subject. We're going to keep trying to change the conversation. And so now we have a situation in which people who really care deeply about racial justice for communities of color are saying, we got to name this. And then they're getting a lot of pushback saying, well, if you name it, you're going to lose some white voters.
Right.
And then the racial justice folks say, well, fuck them. They're probably racist anyway.
Right.
So why am I not going to name the greatest source of harm in my life? And then this other side comes back and says, you fool, you're going to cost us the election. But really, both sides, when they get stuck like that, both sides are costing us power. Because here we've got this coalition, this progressive coalition that needs government to work for people, not to oppress them, but to work for them. But they can't agree on how to talk about it. And that's the problem we're trying to solve here.
You are the guy who I think is talking and writing in both your most recent books about this issue and how to create that bridge between those two ideologies, which I'm trying to say are both right, but are eating each other alive. And so it makes it hard for us to win. And then getting back to what you said, though, about class and that the super wealthy basically are using race to divide us. It reminds me of my friend John Fugelsang's quote, where this kind of applies to it. Rich people pay Fox people to make middle-class people blame poor people. And I've always thought that was
Can I take credit for that? Can you let me see if I put that someplace in my book.
It's perfect.
It's
perfect, it names,
right? I mean,
some of, go ahead.
That's exactly right. The Fox News personalities are millionaire shills for the billionaire class.
Yes, exactly. And I've always said that politicians divide us to get votes. And more importantly, and I think more effectively, being someone who's been in media, corporate media forever, people in media divide us to get the ratings they need to be on the big networks, to sell the big ads. And that is really easy to do. And they've been effective at it for years. But just getting back to the strategy, are you saying that there's like these super wealthy guys in the back rooms with monocles and strategically and overtly saying, geez, here's what we'll do. Get them caught up talking about race, and then we can get our taxes lowered and make more money. I mean, is it overt? Is it strategic? And where? Who's doing that? Who's saying that?
You could, so this all really starts in the 1970s. I guess it really starts with Barry Goldwater in 1963. So let's go back to him. So the Republican Party in the 1950s and the early 1960s was part of the New Deal consensus. And let's be clear about what that means. The New Deal consensus means government should work for average working Americans. And in order to do that, it needs to regulate the marketplace. It needs progressive taxation to transfer wealth from the very top back out to the rest of society. It needs to create routes of upward mobility, including funding excellent and affordable public education, and it needs to fund a social safety net. So if you think about Dwight Eisenhower with his Vice President Richard Nixon, they expanded Social Security. They were part of this New Deal consensus. Government should work. I mean, it's radical. Government should work for most people.
Yeah.
All right. So how dangerous is this?
Yeah.
Along comes this guy, Barry Goldwater, and he's a throwback to the Gilded Era. And Goldwater, he's totally sincere, but what he believes is the wealthy are the main engines of social progress, and the role of government is to facilitate wealth accumulation. We should this is rule by the rich. Now, what the guy's saying is, and he's a scion of a wealthy retail family, I'm rich. I know what's good for society. So government should work to make me richer. Nobody is going to vote for that crap, right? Nobody's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to vote to make rich guys richer because they'll take care of me. So Goldwater says in 1963, in the sort of height of the civil rights movement, let's go hunting where the ducks are. And he says, so he's saying, hey, I'm not going to win on an argument for economic royalism. Let's go hunting where the ducks are. And where are the ducks? The ducks in Goldwater's mind were Southern whites, lifelong Democrats, lifelong sort of loyalists of the New Deal. I mean, think about the New Deal. It brought jobs. It brought electricity to the South. Southern whites loved the New Deal, but they hated civil rights. They hated integration. And Goldwater said, let's go appeal to them about slowing down school integration, about reversing Brown versus Board of Education. Let's go talk to them about attacking these so-called activist judges who just said formal racial segregation and humiliation is unconstitutional. He lost the national election. He won in 5 Southern states. Diehard Democrats, diehard loyalists of the New Deal, they flipped and voted for an economic royalist Republican who appealed to them on racial grounds. And that was proof of concept, right? Then everybody could see after that, oh, wow, arguments for rule by the rich, completely repudiated by the country after the Great Depression and with the New Deal, could be resurrected if recast in terms of racial resentment. And just to pick this up a little bit, guess who got his start in politics as a spokesperson for Barry Goldwater? Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Right? It was Ronald Reagan. So Nixon does this a little bit, but Nixon's still a moderate Republican. For Nixon, dog whistling is like, how do I win votes? But when Ronald Reagan campaigns, for president in 1980, he gets the nomination to be the official candidate for the Republican Party. He's campaigning on these themes that government is the problem. We got to deregulate. We got to unleash the power of the marketplace. But that's not his main campaign theme. His main campaign theme he introduces in Philadelphia. Right? He goes to Philadelphia to introduce himself to the country. That's the first campaign rally he's going to hold as the official Republican candidate for president, except it's not Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's not like, oh, look, the Constitution was signed here. Here's the Liberty Bell. It's Philadelphia, Mississippi.
Mississippi burning.
Mississippi burning. Infamous because just 16 years earlier, 3 civil rights workers had been lynched and their bodies stuffed in an earthen dam. Reagan goes down there, crowd, 10,000 cheering whites, and he says, I'm for states' rights, which means the rights of southern states to resist federal laws mandating integration.
And by the way, I think a really interesting parallel when you fast forward, and I don't want to, but to Trump, you have to. Yeah, every time I hear someone talk about Reagan's announcement in Philadelphia, Mississippi, I think about Trump going to Tulsa on Juneteenth, originally wanting to on Juneteenth, where the massacre occurred. And ironically enough, the black conservative Herman Cain died because he went to that to that rally in Tulsa. But just again
let that be a metaphor for what happens when you fall for this shit.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Trump is really important. Trump long had political aspirations, and the first time he ran for office, he actually ran to be to get the nomination of a splinter progressive party. And in that contest, he was actually up against Pat Buchanan, who was this culture warrior, racial provocateur, religious, moral majority kind of guy.
Super anti-immigrant.
Anti-immigrant. Yep. And Donald Trump says, what Pat Buchanan is doing is disgusting. He's affirmatively trying to divide America, trying to make Americans hate Americans, and it's disgusting. This is the moment when Trump, who I think has no allegiance other than to himself and a sort of a class allegiance to his sort of imagined friends in the billionaire class.
Yeah, his ambition is winning and destroying other people at any cost. Period.
Yeah, so he's like, well, I'll try being a liberal, and it's at that moment that you can see that he understands clearly divide and conquer politics as a strategy. Now, fast forward to 2015, he's getting ready to launch. What does he do? He asks some of the people closest to him to study Rush Limbaugh and Fox News. He's like, I don't really have any political commitments myself, but these guys know how to stir racist fear and hatred. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to mimic them. And that's right. So is this for some people a cold, calculated, intentional, purposeful, well thought out strategy? Absolutely. Or another way to say this is, a lot of times when we talk about racism, we're like, oh, we're fighting institutional racism. We're fighting systemic racism. I got that. Yes, we are. But the biggest source of racism in our lives today, in America today, right now, is the strategic racism of very powerful people. And I'm also thinking people like the Koch brothers, or the Koch brother, now that one of them passed on.
Yeah. Thanks for making the correction.
The Mercers. Right. I mean, there are very powerful people. The guys in the Heritage Foundation, Chris Rufo, who's promoting the attacks on critical race theory, off to the Manhattan Institute. These guys are sitting around and saying, how do I win power? And then they're saying to themselves, there's a pretty good roadmap for winning power. You stoke racial fear and conflict. So let me do that. They are the classic racial demagogue.
And what is happening right now in the country is, you've seen this and you've written about this over and over. It just keeps coming back in different versions. And this version is called critical race theory. But as I learned from reading your book and from watching you speak and talk about this issue, they have no idea what critical race theory is. None.
They don't care.
They could care less.
That's not the point.
And it's really confusing. It's not diversity and inclusion programming. It's not a whole bunch of other things that have been effective and haven't been that controversial in the workplace and institutions. They have no idea what it is. And in our school district, my daughter's middle school, the superintendent just sent a letter home, professor, saying, we decided to shelve a presentation that was going to be made by middle school students teaching about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Wow.
Because we had one of these very divisive, the police union leaked a child's presentation slideshow, amended it, literally changed things on it. And it's been really controversial. You're seeing this play out at school boards. There was a fight last night. I'm sure there's a lot more. We're just not seeing of it. This is happening. It is effective. It's working so well for them, this CRT strategy. What can we do? Because I really wanted to talk with you tonight to get a game plan of what parents, what community members can do. This is a really great example where you get real local. You're seeing this. You're going to see this happen in your school. And it is really bad. And it gets into teaching history. What do we do to combat this? Because they're so good at it. They're using the playbook that you've written about, dog whistling, and they have no idea what they're talking about. No idea what critical race theory is.
So here's what not to do.
Okay.
Do not get sucked into a debate about what critical race theory is or is not.
Okay.
And you can see this. Right? So
I don't know what I'm going to do with my time then. That's all I do is debate people on Facebook.
We've got other fun things to talk about.
Okay.
So here's what they're doing. They're saying, hey, CRT teaches little kids to hate white people.
Hate themselves.
Yeah, okay. So this is the equivalent of somebody saying, hey, that Democratic politician beats his spouse all the time. Right? That's what's happening, right? This is completely outrageous, zero evidence, totally outrageous. So would the politician be well advised to say, I don't beat my spouse all the time?
Right.
Right? And then that should be the conversation. Likewise, the conversation should be CRT teaches little kids to hate white people and hate themselves or not. That should be the conversation. That's precisely the conversation the right wants us to have, right? And all the better if they can lure professors into it, right? Because because there's two different sort of culture war sort of fronts here. One is people who talk about race, and the other is, oh, you should fear cultural elites. They're the real threat in your life. They look down. They're condescending towards you. Don't worry about the Koch brothers. They just run the effing country. They're not the elites you need to worry about. Yes, right? So you get this combination.
Yeah.
Okay. So Chris Rufo would love to have law professors on doing this sort of, I've, done this survey and this reading, and we make a distinction between systemic racism, which means this, and institutional racism, which means that, which, by the way, I wrote an article making that distinction. So we do stuff like that.
Yeah, you do.
That's not the conversation to have, right? So here the conversation to have is, we know divide and conquer politics when we hear it. We believe in each other. We believe in our neighbors. We believe in the good sense of our teachers. And we also believe some people profit when they lie and they push us to fight each other. Don't try and come in here and divide us. We believe in taking care of each other and in talking to each other, right? And so that's the conversation. Here's the other thing to do with this. Recognize and continually insist this isn't just about critical race theory. Right. This is the same lies that are being told about transgender folks and supposedly threatening children in bathrooms or transgender teens on the wrong sports team. That is divide and conquer politics. Yeah. Don't debate the details. Yeah. Call out the con. Say this is being pushed by politicians who work for the billionaire class. So we'll fear and fight our neighbors. And here's the other big con. The big lie about the election. Don't debate the facts. It's clear there was no fraud.
Right.
Joe Biden won. What's the point of the lie? The point of the lie is to get people fearing and fighting each other. Look beyond the fraud. Look beyond the con. Who profits when we're divided? And how do we succeed? We succeed by building power together.
I completely agree with that. I think that's a great way to handle it, but I want to push back just on who's behind this. Like, when I say, if I go to the school board and say, listen, they're trying to get us to fight each other. We're neighbors. We love each other. It doesn't matter what our background is. We all should agree on that, right? We agree. Okay, they're trying to divide us. The truth is, Professor, in this case, in our town, and I think in towns across the country, this is coming from police departments, their families, and their supporters. That's where it's coming. And they're saying you hate police.
Super interesting. So there's actually two sources. So sometimes this stuff seems to bubble up from the parents, right?
Sure,
and so
for sure.
And I'll get to the police unions in just a second because it's really important.
This is the PBA in my town.
Yeah. So I've just switched over. I'm now looking at the Heritage Foundation website.
Oh, good for you. That's a
Heritage
fun place to
Foundation.
Be.
They're all about tax cuts for the rich, deregulation, pro-corporate policies. How do they do that? They're Barry Goldwater reincarnated. They know they can't build popular support just by campaigning on policies that are good for the largest corporations and the wealthiest tycoons. So they too are very busy, A, promoting the lie that the election was stolen, and B, promoting the story that critical race theory is a threat. So they've got a major article on their website that says, keep racist critical race theory ideology out of K through 12 classrooms. And the first paragraph said, how would you feel if your child came home from school and said her teacher had told her that everything that happens in the world is racist and she's part of the problem because of the color of her skin? In other words, the Heritage Foundation, working for the wealthiest tycoons in the country, is like astroturfing hysteria about critical race theory. Okay. And this really pushes the point I'm trying to make. This is class war being waged in the form of racism. Okay. But now but now let's pivot. Let's talk about police unions, because they're not the billionaire class. No. But let's be clear about who the police unions are, the prison guards are, the border patrol union. These are guys whose livelihood depends on the public believing we need levels of policing and incarceration that exceed anything we've seen in the entire history of this country, and that vastly exceeds anything in any other industrialized nation. We have 5% of the world's population, 1/4 of the world's prisoners, and all of that is rooted in racist lies about supposedly dangerous Black and brown people. And in whose interest is it to keep promoting racist lies about dangerous Black and brown people? The people whose economic livelihood depends on them being the arm of state violence against those communities. And I think that I love labor. I love unions.
Sure.
But we need to be super crystal clear. The labor unions that represent state violence, police unions, border guards, prison guards, their livelihood depends on racist lies that dehumanize and demonize brown and Black people. And that's what they're going to do 24/7. And again, and I really want to emphasize this is an analysis that says, don't blame white racism in general. Look behind it. Who's profiting from it?
Right.
Sometimes it's the billionaire class like the Heritage Foundation, but sometimes it's police officers and prison guards, right? And I'm not indicting all of them, but structurally, there's a dynamic in which their jobs depend on continued mass incarceration and mass deportation. And you really see that expressed when they act politically, collectively through their unions.
And
individually, they can be good guys.
Sure.
Individually, they might be like, I'm not doing this. But when they act collectively through their unions politically, they do so very often in ways that promote the racist demonization of Black and brown people.
And they will say, and they did in this Facebook chain that I paid attention to and barely participated in, that we don't see race. I don't see Black and white, and I'm colorblind, and it's I don't know what to say, generally speaking, when people say that. But my answer generally is, well, listen, there are laws. Do you agree or disagree that there are laws and there are systems that minimize, marginalize, and discriminate against people of color?
Don't do that. Don't do that, because you're giving them too much credit. Say something like, Donald Trump says that too. Richard Nixon said that too.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
all of the racists say that. Yeah.
The point is, modern racism takes the form of a massive project of gaslighting. Even the alt-right. The alt-right is like, they were white nationalists And then they're like, oh, that makes us sound racist. Let's call ourselves the alt-right. Okay, well, what do you folks believe? We believe that people of color are trying to replace us and that race war is inevitable. It's like, shit, you guys are racist. No, we're not. We're the alt-right, right? So we need a culture, and this is really hard. This is really hard for average folks. Average folks are decent. We want to believe other people, and we want to hear them. We want to talk to them. We want to be respectful. We want to give them credit for being honest. But the reality is the Republican Party, starting in 1963, committed itself to a politics of lying, a politics of fraud, a politics of con. And here's the con. There's really two. The con that we're talking about is the con that says, hey, America, even though we're talking about illegals or welfare cheats or whatnot, we're not really talking about race. That's a con. But the most important con is, hey, white folks, we really care about you. Because that's bullshit. They don't. Right. You wouldn't have the number of pandemic deaths you do in red states if Republicans actually cared about their base. They do not actually care about their base.
No, they care about that's a great point, but let me just...
They care about power.
Yeah, so, and in that case, what they did was they used the messaging of mask versus anti-mask. It was brilliant. Oh, if it wasn't so evil, chef's kiss to Trump or whoever came up with the idea that if you wear a
mask down and give him that big kiss.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was making jokes about it. I kept making jokes about it. Like the idea is if you wear a mask, you're weak, you're a pussy, which is such a pejorative word because pussies pass out babies, and that's a lot of pain. And I measure strength by pain, how much you can take. But if you wear a mask, you're weak. It's like saying to a firefighter, if you wear an oxygen tank, you're a wuss. What's with your fireproof jacket, you weakling? But it worked.
It up.
So it worked to divide us by telling them don't wear a life preserver in the water. And if you do, they're on the other side. That messaging, that anti-masking messaging was so effective. And people died as a result, just as you're saying. They're dying. Same thing with the vaccine.
They're dying because they're not getting vaccinated, right? Let me pick up on something, the pussy remark. Although as a law professor at UC Berkeley, I'm professionally inhibited from actually saying that word. So we'll just assume I didn't. Actually, what I want to get at here is a very serious point. What we're witnessing, what we're in the midst of is class war. But class war is being waged through culture war politics. Yeah. And we've been talking a lot about race. But gender and then homophobia is very much part of the culture war politics. So the Republican Party in the early 1970s, once they adopted race as a strategy, also said, hey, very closely connected to race is this fear about race mixing in terms of gender relationships. And then they went from there to traditional families and patriarchy. The Republican Party used to support abortion, but they flipped. Ronald Reagan was part of that flip where they said, hey, we can turn patriarchy and traditional gender roles into part of our culture war. Here's the other thing I want to say to sort of, to say this wasn't just the 1970s and 80s. Right now we're seeing more regulations of abortion than we've seen in decades, attempted regulations even of contraception, right? This isn't about autonomy and da-da-da-da. This is about forcing people into traditional gender roles or rather making people fight each other about traditional gender roles rather than focus on who's wielding power, right? But here's this other thing that I want to say. When you go back to the 1910s, the 1920s, this was an era in which there'd been rapid industrialization, huge, enormous concentrations of wealth, the Gilded Era. Progressives were pushing for this radical insight that government should actually work for average folks and not for corporations. And the big money then pushed back by saying, if government were actually to protect you, they would be treating you like a girl. They would be treating you like a child. Real men don't need government protection, right? This is called paternalism. It's paternalistic. It's the nanny state. That sort of gender argument, it has been updated with a sort of a racial version Government betrays you when it tries to create programs and social safety nets and routes of upward mobility, because that's a form of racial betrayal. Those programs are for undeserving minorities, not for you hardworking whites. But that gender thing keeps coming through. And this whole anti-mask thing, this whole liberty thing, this whole I'm not a sheep, it's heavily imbued with gender. Real men do not need protection from government. They can go out and get sick and die all by themselves, right? But that gender thing is a really big component ideologically of the way in which class war is sold, is popularized.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad that I said the bad word now, because we got into gender and sexual orientation, which is also part of what you're saying in terms of they don't really care. I mean, to some extent they do, but they use it to divide and conquer. And it's just the idea that we thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be the first female president. And I promised both my daughters when they woke up, they would get to witness that. And instead, a guy who had been accused by several women of rape and sexual assault won.
And would confess to sexual assault. Like he boasted
for sure,
of it.
yeah. And then appointed, Justice Kavanaugh and everything that came with that. That was all gender heavy stuff. And then the toxic masculinity that comes with so many of these, all the issues that you're talking about in terms of the pandemic and you're weak if you wear a mask and all of that. Right. That has been so animating for voters, and not to mention the trans issue, which I keep saying, and I could be wrong about this. There's not that many trans people, but it is there's so few, and they get huge ratings, huge ratings.
Okay, so tell me again how we need, and this is when I'm thinking about the conservative Catholic bishops. Tell me again about how y'all need to rally to support these transgender bathroom laws because you're so concerned about the sexual assault of children. But you won't clean your own house. You won't make amends for the way in which pedophilia was institutionalized and then institutionally protected.
Yeah.
I mean, pedophilia is an enormous issue. The main risk is not coming from trans folks. There's barely any risk at all. That's yet another lie designed to get us to fear each other rather than to focus on how power is actually operating in society.
It's another, it's so easy. I mean, if I listen to these guys as much as I can, and they just talk about trans people playing sports all the time, and it's like, where are these people? How is it affecting? How is this affecting your life? Let's talk about health insurance, which is what poor white people and middle class white people and black people.
So don't do that. Don't do that. Right? Don't. So one classic Democratic move is to say, hey, you're stoking hate. Let's talk policy. Right? And it's like, no, because what they're doing is they're showing Nightmare on Elm Street, and you're like, we should cut away to McNeil-Lehrer report. It's like you're gonna right. It's just it's not going to work, right? So, but I do want to really hit this positive note and say, look, for the last 4 years, I've been working with communication specialists, with pollsters, running these studies. People are very hungry for a simple story that says, yeah, your life sucks. You are under threat, but the people who threaten you aren't your neighbors. It's these divide and conquer politicians working for the billionaire class. Respond to divide and conquer with Unite and Build. See through the con. Don't get played. Build power with your neighbors. Fight back. And when we talk in those terms, not in the policy terms are too difficult, right? This is really a conversation about identity. Who am I? Who respects me? Who's my ally? Who threatens me?
Right.
And the right is having that conversation all the time. The right is saying the time, there's good people, there's bad people. The government threatens you because they're betraying you and taking care of the bad people. Yep. You're on your own in the marketplace. Trust the people who succeeded in the marketplace. And by the way, buy a gun because government won't protect you from the bad people, right? So, if the left responds by saying, well, let's just talk policy, people are stuck with the right's identity story. And they're like, I don't want to talk about policy. I want to talk about the fact that my neighbors threatened me and I got to go get a gun. So the left needs to come back and say, who are you? You're someone who believes in taking care of your family and believes in building power with your neighbors. And who threatens you? Greedy billionaires who are trying to play you. And who are your allies? Everybody who will clasp arms with you, build power with you, and make sure that your family and their family are taken care of. And government's your ally when we get government to work for people and not for corporations. Clasp arms with your neighbor, get government back on the side of average folks, right? And so people, what is this as an identity story? It is an identity story that says, feel proud of who you are when you build power with your neighbors and take care of your family and your community. Mm-hmm. Feel proud of who you are, right? It gives people a sense of self. And it identifies a clear threat, and it says the threat is over there. The threat is the Josh Hawleys, the Chris Rufos, these guys who are telling lies and laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
Fuck them. That's the real threat.
Yeah.
You're not going to fall for it. You're going to build power with your neighbors, and you're especially going to build power across the fault lines that they tell you should fear people. You're going to be like, I don't know any trans people. Maybe I should get to know some. I don't know anybody who's undocumented. Let me get to know some. I suspect they're just like me, trying to do their best to take care of their family. Racial divisions, I don't have that many friends with different races. Let me build some bridges, because I believe that we're all basically good. We're all basically trying to take care of ourselves, our families, our neighbors. Let's just expand who our neighbors are. Let's not get played by people who are saying, fear your neighbor, buy a gun, trust a billionaire. I mean, how stupid a story is that?
I hope people I think listening to you is what Democrats certainly need to do to try to keep the House. So my last question is, and a lot of this strategy and what you've learned in the years of research is in your new book, Merge Left, Fusing Race and Class, Winning Elections and Saving America. Buy it now to also save democracy, because I know that you are one of those people, like most, I think, intelligent people who pay close attention to history and politics, that is ringing the bell. So in this last moment, ring the bell and tell us what we need to do outside of getting your book and learning the strategies that you're arguing for.
And also, listen, I would love it for people to buy the book, obviously. But I also realize a lot of folks aren't going to buy the book. A lot of folks aren't going to sit down with it. I put together a free online resource, Race Class Academy. So race-class-academy.com. Race Class Academy is a it's a self-paced set of short little videos. If you're a real glutton for punishment or you've had too much espresso, you can watch all 12 in under 30 minutes. But it's really like, okay, work through these ideas. But let me ring this bell.
I'll link that in the show notes, everybody, so you can get to it there. Go ahead.
Awesome. Here's the sense of urgency I feel, and I want to say this plainly.
Thank you.
I do not think we can recover our democracy if we lose the House after 2022.
Oh, that's excellent news.
I'm much more pessimistic.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the January 6th insurrection alone that makes me so deeply pessimistic. It's how the Republican Party has responded since.
Yes.
They have responded since by saying we're good with insurrection, and also we're going to do everything we can to subvert democratic elections, right? And I understand how they got there. They got there because these folks adopted racial demagoguery as a strategy 50 years ago, and that turned out to be a monster they couldn't control. And generation after generation of Republican elected officials has been challenged by somebody even more extreme. And we went from Nixon to Reagan, and then from Reagan to the Gingrich Revolution, and then we went to the Tea Party and the Freedom Caucus, then we went to Trump, and now we've got the fevered apocalyptic hysteria of QAnon, right? And that shit's coming because racial demagoguery is sort of a call and response between base and politicians that keeps not only radicalizing the base, but radicalizing the politicians themselves. I don't think the United States has ever seen an era, except immediately before the Civil War, when so many of the elected officials of one political party were so deeply committed to subverting democracy because their base demanded it.
Yeah.
That's where we are right now. I don't want to end there. I do want to end by saying Democrats can solve this. We Americans can solve this. How do we solve this? Stop thinking that the problem in America is first and foremost white people or white racism. Start recognizing that the problem in America is class war waged by promoting racism. We need to fight racism. Every single one of us needs to fight racism. And why are we doing that? Partly because it's the moral thing to do. We are a moral people. But more importantly, because fighting racism is the only way we will build enough political power to change this country's direction, to defeat the people stoking division, and bonus points to elect the sorts of folks who make sure government actually works for all of us, rather than for corporations and for tycoons.
Professor Ian Haney-Lopez, what an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I was just a delight, and I look forward to joining you again.
How about that? What'd I tell you? Ian Haney-Lopez. Go follow him on Twitter. Get his books. Tell him you heard him here on Stand Up so we can get him back on the program. Always great when you give my guests feedback like that. So please check out his work and let me know what you thought of that. Really happy with that conversation, and also very happy with this conversation because I reached out to one of the most inspiring people I know, Amanda Litman, who's the co-founder of Run for Something, the author of the book and podcast with the same name, runforsomething.net. She was instrumental in helping India Walton win in Buffalo and so many other progressive candidates win as well. I'm really excited about this. I caught up with her while she was on her phone outside in Brooklyn at Amanda Litman on Twitter. I think you're going to like this and learn a lot from it as well. Here we go right now with Run for Something's Amanda Litman, guest 2 on episode 378 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic right now. All right, I've got her now. She is on the phone. I should warn you, she's outside. She insisted on being outside. No, I'll take her. I'll take her wherever I can get her. And so we might hear a horn or a child, but I will take Amanda Litman on any form of communication anytime because I think you're one of the most important people in politics. How about that? Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Sorry for the noise, but you're one of my favorite people to talk to, so I'm happy to make it happen.
If a child comes by and wants to scream, we'll just put them on the show and ask them what if they want to run for something, because they're probably running past you. First of all, it's been a while since we talked. I'm really excited to reconnect with you and talk about what your organization is up to. So just want to start with the big win last night with from India Walton, who is won in Buffalo. I've already talked about it. And she joined me here on the program a couple times. But just talk to me about her win, because, boy, it was probably more talked about than any other in all of yesterday's elections. What do you want to say about her and how she won and why she won and what it means?
India is amazing. She's the kind of candidate Run for Something loves working with. She's 38 years old. She was at 14, became a mom. At 19, gave birth to preemie twins, which inspired her to become a nurse. She then had another kid. She ended up making her way through college, ultimately becoming a nonprofit executive. And when she realized how much her mayor was not delivering for her community, she decided to run against him. He's a 4-term incumbent. He's a Democrat. He was very anti-police, or very protecting Black people from police, I should say, pro-police, anti-police reform. And India said, that's not acceptable. That's not what our community needs. She won by building a real grassroots, people-powered campaign. Run for Something was thrilled to endorse her. I did a fundraiser for her. Our regional director, Manny Especia, worked really closely with her campaign and with the Working Families Party team who was behind her. I had her on the Run for Something podcast a couple weeks ago where she told her story so beautifully. And seeing her win and becoming not just one of the first socialist mayors in America, but also the first woman mayor of Buffalo is just, it's so beautiful and so deserved. We need more people like India in office. So you truly love to see it. Yeah.
My concern for India and some of the other candidates that you've supported, and I know it shouldn't be, but I'm just naive, is that they get in too deep. I mean, so many of the candidates that you have supported kind of weren't necessarily involved in politics. They just saw something wrong in their community and they wanted to put their name forward, put their everything they have forward. But then once campaigning is different than governing. And I worry already. I'm like, oh my God, she's now going to be the mayor of Buffalo and she doesn't have experience and that machine is going to eat her up, or any of the other candidates. Why is it not true that people that don't have a background in politics can necessarily succeed once they're in office?
the way you get experience running a city or learning how to be a school board member or being a state legislator is by doing it. You know, it's much like art or music. The way you become an artist or musician is by making art or making music. The way you become a mayor is by being mayor. And she's going to have an incredible team who can help her. She's going to have an amazing support system. And she's really smart. She really understands her community.
Well,
I am not worried about India crushing it as the next mayor of Buffalo.
When you guys, how do you find out what is the criteria for your organization to endorse and support? Are there litmus tests? Are there policies that if they they're not on board? I mean, how do you do it? There's a lot of great people that you guys could select and endorse, and your organization has become really influential and matters a lot, which I think is awesome. But how do you? Is it tough to decide who you're going to get behind? Are there prerequisites, litmus tests, etc.?
Not quite a litmus test. You know, we ask every person for a campaign plan, a budget, a win number, how they're going to get from A to Z. We want to make sure that they meet some basic progressive values, but we don't have any clear policy litmus tests, in part because we work with candidates in all 50 states and for a range of offices. So it would be crazy if we had a specific policy position we wanted everyone to abide by. That's just not realistic for a 50-state strategy. That being said, we are definitely looking for people who build campaigns like India's, where they're really focused on connecting with their community, or authentic members. They really know how to reflect the people they're trying to serve, and they've got a plan for how to get it done. That doesn't always mean the most successful fundraising or whatever the polling might say, but it's absolutely looking for people who know how to knock doors and are willing to do the work. We don't want lazy candidates. So we endorse about half the people who apply, maybe. You know, obviously there's some demographic criteria too, folks under 40, folks running for state or local office for the first time, folks who really share our values. But for the most part, it's folks who are all-stars like India, who clearly have that X factor of they're going to be leading something big one day, and we got to help them get their start.
How much do you look at, what community they belong to? You've helped support a lot of people of color, a lot of women, a lot of members of the LGBT community. I don't think that, straight, white, cis men should not apply necessarily, but how much does it matter that they come from a community that qualifies more as a minority or, historically discriminated or marginalized? Why does that matter?
Well, it's certainly important in the sense that for a lot of folks running from quote unquote untraditional backgrounds, meaning not straight white men, they don't get seen as viable candidates. They're often written off before they even get started. So we want to make sure that we're not screening for that or against that in any meaningful way up front. But we also want to make sure that folks are really reflective of the communities they're trying to serve. So in some places that might mean a straight white man, but in many places it probably doesn't. So we're really conscientious of that and of the kind of community this person is running in and what values and aspects of that community their leaders reflect. So you're right. We've endorsed more than half of our endorsed candidates are women, more than half are people of color, about a quarter are LGBTQ. They really do. They look like America, which is what makes them really powerful.
So I've always been impressed with you and your work and everything that you've been involved with. And then when I was thinking about talking to you, and I've been wanting to talk to you for a while now, I was like, well, this person is like a superhero. She's an optimist. She gets things done. She has helped so many people, so purpose-driven. But then I was like, I wonder what she thinks about the future of democracy. How concerned are you about all of these new laws that make it harder for people to vote in different areas? How involved are you with that? How concerned are you about it?
Well, I thank you for the kind words. I am an optimist, which is what makes seeing what's happening on the state legislative level so frustrating. Republicans are passing some of the most egregious voter suppression we've ever seen, specifically targeted at communities of color, at young people, at Democratic voters. And they're doing things under the table, like changing who certifies elections and who counts the votes and pulling Democrats and Democrats of color, especially, off of local election authority positions. All of it is meant because they know they can't win on the values of their ideas. So they have to win by rigging the system. Yeah. And I hate that. It makes me furious. And I think the only solution is, or one of the many solutions, perhaps the most important solution, is taking away the power of the Republicans who have it. But I do think we're at sort of a dangerous moment for democracy. If Democrats do not win back some of these state legislative seats and give, at least, even in places where we can't flip the chamber, make the minority more powerful. Like we saw what happened in Texas. Even when Texas Democrats did not have the power, they were able to make their voices heard and make sure that we're winning these county executive positions, these local boards of election authorities. And especially as you think about the argument happening around school boards, making sure we're winning all of these positions that lay the foundation for structural power. And if we don't do that in 2022, and that's part of what Run for Something's focus is, I don't know what the future of democracy looks like. And sometimes I feel like a chicken running around with my head cut off, like the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But I do think this is a make or break moment for democracy and for the Democratic Party. And if we don't get it right now, we might not ever have another chance to fix it.
Why make the case, Amanda, as to why you think it's important to support such local offices like school board and town commissioner? I mean, Run for Something endorses people all the way up and down the political scale in terms of how many people you represent, how big your office is. I'm not explaining this very well, but I think people know what I'm talking about. I mean, from senators to school board, you guys endorse all different people. But my specific question is, why does it matter so much to you to support some of these seemingly less consequential, as you look at the national picture, positions that you do endorse?
Well, I think there's the policy reasons, like the fact that school board members determine curriculums and how much our teachers are paid, and city councils determine often the value of housing by what kind of affordable housing is available and the quality of our streets and our public transit. They also control things like police budgets, and mayors determine policies that directly affect our quality of lives. There's a pragmatic reason, which is that these offices control the structures of power, which is what Republicans have understood for decades. If you control who writes the rules, who draws the maps, who decides who can vote, you can control who wins elections without ever having a more popular message. Then there's the politics reason, which is the folks who are our city council members and mayors today are going to be our future governors and senators and presidents tomorrow. So, dealer's choice on what it is that inspires you to show up at the polls or to engage in a local election, but there's no wrong reason. The only wrong reason for not engaging is not engaging at all.
How much do you and your organization think about messaging? I get so irked when people talk about how bad Democrats are at messaging and how good Republicans are, because I find that to be a false equivalency. I think it's a lot easier to message to a more homogenous group of people than it is to message to a more diverse group of people who have a real diversity of background, ethnicity, socioeconomics, religion, whereas Republicans and conservatives are increasingly similar in what they think and view. So it's easier to message them, and we could get more into that if we wanted to, I'm sure. But how much do you think about the messaging, and what do you make of what I think is a smart point that I sometimes make, Amanda, about that false equivalency?
I do think, Republicans certainly have it easier in that they have one kind of voter they're trying to reach, so they don't have to sort of appeal to the masses. But I often think the conversation about message gets conflated with a conversation about messenger. You can see this best example here. If AOC says something and then Joe Biden says something, those two things are received very differently, even if they use the exact same words and the exact same policies. And it's not just because of what they're saying, it's who they are and the reputation and brand associated with the person saying it. So while I do think it's really important for Democrats to identify a message and our core values, I actually think our bigger problem is we haven't empowered enough people who know how to communicate those messages authentically in a way that resonates with folks who might not share many of, my or your or any of your listeners' values. We got to make sure that we're meeting people where they're at and give them a messenger they can relate to. I think it's just as important as what they're saying as who's doing the talking.
Really great answer. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's been so much controversy about the phrase defund the police, and so many different political scientists examining how it's interpreted and how it helps, or I think more likely, in my opinion, is that it really hurts a lot of candidates in most places. And of course, Republicans and conservatives are just dunking on progressives across the country. They're saying that certain candidates like Joe Biden believe it, even though he's never said it, never endorsed it. Doesn't matter. They just say it, of course. And it looks to be a winning issue, not to mention this attack on teaching fucking history in schools. It's happening in my district right now, my kid's district. It's terrifying. But those two messages are really winning messages, in my opinion. I'd love to be wrong, for Republicans, conservatives, cult members, whatever they want to, however we should refer to them at this point. How concerned are you about kind of those issues and how they seem to be working for conservatives to slam progressives with?
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that's concerning. And we know that when you change the words that you're using, when you go from talking about defund the police to reinvest in our communities, to reducing crime by giving people affordable housing, to making sure that the right people are responding to the right kind of emergency or right kind of crisis, that's not as popular. We just have to make sure that we're not letting the wrong people have the loudest megaphones. And I think this is something that progressives often get in our own heads about, understanding the difference between an activist who is fighting for a community and someone who is speaking for that community, which is often can be conflated. But I do think that there is a lot of wiggle room and a lot of places where candidates can safely land. And in fact, if you're interested, Run for Something did a big research project on this last summer, I guess at this point, on ways to talk about reimagining public safety that really do appeal to all kinds of voters, not just to Democrats or primary folks. So it's all on our website if you're interested.
I think that your organization is one of the most important organizations in politics and creating positive change in this country for so many people who so badly need it. And I'm going to go do my recurring donation. That seems to be the best thing that you can do for an organization like yours. But, what are you asking, folks listening to our conversation? What can people do outside of running themselves? And by the way, getting the book that you wrote, which is like a handbook for it all and super helpful. I mean, is it donate? And because money is, let's be honest, money is what matters more than anything else to launch a campaign. You need money to have a campaign, to be seen, to be heard. I wish we were in a different situation, but we aren't. And your organization helps people learn to raise money, get them money. So what can people do?
Well, I'll repeat it, even though you already said it. If you're listening to this, you should think about running for office. Runforwhat.net is where you go. The book, I don't know, it's probably pretty good. People like it.
Yeah.
Listen to the podcast, too. We have a Run for Something podcast. We talk to candidates like India, like a number of other folks who've run and won and run and lost about their experiences. They'll really inspire you. And, of course, make a donation. A recurring donation is best. Runforsomething.net/donate. I assure you, every dollar goes to recruiting and supporting young, diverse progressives running for local office, and our team uses it wisely. We are scrappy, we are nimble, we are tired, and we are grateful. So whatever you can do really helps.
And you are inspiring. You and your whole team are, and I'm so excited to reconnect with you and to have you on to talk about your organization. You're one of the people and organization that gives me a lot of hope and optimism, and I'll go sign up now, and I will promote it. Go listen to the podcast, go sign up, get the book. Follow Amanda on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining me. I will take you anytime on any phone connection.
Thank you, Pete. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, there you go. Amanda Litman and Ian Haney-Lopez, and a lot of news, and another episode of Stand Up Pete Dominic in the can. Thank you so much for listening. Please support the show with a subscription, a paid subscription for as little as $5. Come on, get over there and do it now if you haven't already. And I really greatly appreciate your support. Hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. That's 8 p.m. Get the link to the Zoom Stand Up Happy Hour Hangout. If you're a subscriber, you'll get an email every day with who is on the show, because it's a daily show, a picture of Vitamin N submitted by a subscriber. And today, you'll get that link. I hope to see you tonight and anytime on the Discord platform, where the chat is always available for you to support you. You're never alone if you're a member of the Stand Up with Pete Dominic community. And here now, one of our favorite members, John Carroll, singing us out with Stand Up, our theme song.
Stand up, let the brave meet the challenge, let the weak flee. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think your driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. We got to open up the window to let in shines one light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run it.